Thank you, and thanks to everyone at FOSDEM for organizing this event. So as you can see, I've made a presentation about creating a computing revolution that centers on private servers. But first, I want to take a look at current events and see what's been in the news lately. Yesterday in the New York Times, we see that there's a story about Russian campaigns of misinformation and the fact that Facebook just can't control this. And a little bit earlier, we saw that it's not even clear that Facebook knows how bad the misinformation problem is. And just about 10 days ago, we saw that Google was hit with a 50 million euro fine because of its failings with GDPR compliance. Here's another story. My bosses at the Freedom Box Foundation, Mishi Chowdhury and Evan Moglen, wrote a story about how WhatsApp in India is being used to game elections so that disinformation can be spread in WhatsApp chat groups. And this problem is so big in India that there are even lynchings that happen on account of what's being sent on WhatsApp. And here's a story that was really popular a couple of years ago. This is the story that popularized the term data is the new oil. And with all that data that's being siphoned off of us in our online activity, comprehensive psychographic profiles can be created. Now, this is a good diagram to take a look at after the talk, and these slides will be uploaded. So it's clear, the internet is broken, and I'm speaking to an audience that knows this already. But to fix the internet and to solve these kinds of problems in particular, we need to re-decentralize the web. All the problems that I just talked about are enabled by centralized network infrastructure. When tech companies control all of the data at the center in the servers that they manage, that's what goes wrong. And to re-decentralize the web, we need a revolution in computing. It's not going to be a problem that we can solve with just software or just hardware. It's going to require a lot of cooperation. So I want to look at the history of computing revolutions. And there's a quote that really stuck out to me when I read it a couple months ago. This is Tim Wu. He's the person who coined the term net neutrality. He said, "No one dreamed that the personal computer, once little more than a toy for hobbyists, would displace the mighty mainframe." There was a time when computing was mainly done on these giant machines about the size of this table called mainframes. And then in the mid-1980s, personal computers, like this laptop, started to become mainstream, and eventually they displaced the mainframe. So my question for you today is, why can't personal servers do the same? Why can't personal servers displace the large centralized servers at the center of our network infrastructure? Okay. Well, I'm going to propose that there are two main reasons why this hasn't happened yet. There's a problem of poor user interfaces on server operating systems, and there's a lack of hardware accessibility. So people don't usually get access to their own server hardware, and that's why people don't have them. FreedomBox is a simple private server that aims to solve this problem. We try to solve the UI problem and the hardware problem by making it easy for anyone to host their own private server. And when they can host their own private server, they can re-decentralize the web one FreedomBox at a time. FreedomBoxes are roughly this big. So let's start by taking a look at user interfaces. This is the first problem. There's a book that was published in 1997 by a psychologist who specializes in technology named Sherry Turkle. Now, Sherry Turkle wrote a book called Life on the Screen, in which she tells a tale of two aesthetics. She talks about the fact that the early personal computers invited users to imagine that they could understand its gears as they turned. And so this is the kind of interface that early PCs had. This is MS-DOS. It looks like a modern console, a modern terminal. And it wasn't until 1984 that Apple introduced the Macintosh, and that Apple introduced this iconic style of simulations, where now you have a simulated desktop with icons. Now, it wasn't until this happened that PCs really took off. Personal computers revolutionized computing because they made it easy for anyone to do it, for non-experts and non-programmers. But this change hasn't happened in private servers yet. FreedomBox aims to do that. So this is what we do with our user interface at FreedomBox. We want our user interface to be simple so that you can just point and click and make things happen. We want it to be beginner-friendly so that it automates whatever can be automated in the process of administering a server. And we also want to have an aesthetic of an integrity to our visual identity, because UIs have been neglected in server operating systems up to this point. So here's what FreedomBox looks like when you first plug it in. You get this screen that tells you FreedomBox is setting itself up. 15 minutes later, you get another screen that says Start Setup. So you click that button on the bottom, and you make an account, enter a username and a password, and that's it. Now you have your own private server. Then you go to the apps page. You see we have about 24 apps, and you hover over one of the apps, and the color appears. Here's the system page. So these are all the settings that you can configure on your FreedomBox. And if you want to install an app, you go to the apps page, and you just click on the button Install. One click, and it installs. Now, this sounds like something that we all do every day on our desktops, but this isn't something that's been made easy on servers yet, and that's what FreedomBox aims to do. So now let's talk about the problem of hardware accessibility, from wanting to doing. There's a quote in a book written by one of the board members of the FreedomBox Foundation. This is Harvard professor Yochai Benkler. He talks about the capital constraints on producing information in the economy. He says, from the steam engine to the assembly line, from the double rotary printing press to the communication satellite, the capital constraints on action were such that simply wanting to do something was rarely a sufficient condition to enable one to do it. If you wanted to do something, you couldn't. But now, now that constraint no longer exists. But the problem is that server hardware is a lot like the mainframes in the 1980s. It's out of the reach of most consumers. Traditional server hardware is expensive, anywhere from $400 to $4,000 just to get yourself started, plus the cost of administration, which usually means you have to hire some kind of an expert. Not just that, but traditional server hardware is hard to find. It's not marketed to home users or consumers. We want to create a personal server revolution that puts these products in the markets that consumers shop. FreedomBox is hardware neutral. This is a fact based on the software that we've built. FreedomBox is a Debian-based operating system for private servers. Because it's Debian-based, that means that it works on any hardware that Debian works on. Now, we picked Debian in part because Debian is known as the universal operating system. It works on almost anything. So if you have an old netbook or Chromebook from 2010, chances are you can probably turn that into a private server. But beyond that, we also want these servers to be inexpensive. And so we've specifically built our software for single board computers, like the Raspberry Pi 2, which costs around $30 US, or Alamex's Lime 2, about $50 US. And we specifically build custom images for around 10 different single board computer models. And this is all the hardware you need to make your own private server, right? This will cost you around $50 US, or maybe around 50, 60 euros. And here's an example of what I have right here. This is the Alamex Lime 2. This is special to us because this hardware is what's known as open source hardware. The schematics are online. All of the details that you need to know about this hardware can be found online because it's open source. Now that's important because one of the constraints on a lot of hardware decisions is the fact that the hardware isn't free and you can't trust it. And so that's why people like me have to use ThinkPad X200 models, which are very old, but that's all we have if we want to rely on free hardware. So we're also trying to make sure that we're inclusive of the latest open source hardware. So what's the future of FreedomBox? We want to partner with universities, we want to partner with organizations and communities to put these FreedomBoxes in places that need them. Right now, there are more than 10 villages in rural India that rely on FreedomBox as their primary source of routing and internet services. That's how powerful this software is. Right now, at Yale University and Cornell University, students and instructors are using FreedomBoxes in the classroom because this is a powerful example to their students of how you can take control of your own data. What we also want to do is grow our community of developers and contributors so that we can continue to expand. And in 2019, we want to enter the hardware market. For the past 9 years of our existence, we haven't sold any hardware kits, but we're working on it. And in 2019, we're going to announce something exciting. So what's at stake? This is where I make my final appeal to everyone in the room. Your privacy is at stake. Your autonomy, your civil rights, democracy, freedom, our future. If we don't fix our network infrastructure, then these things will be jeopardized. Those stories that I showed you at the beginning of my presentation, those were mostly recent stories. Every day you read something new like that. So what can you do? You can lead the change. You can use software like FreedomBox. You can advocate for decentralizing technology. You can contribute to projects in this area. And you can also help us lead the change. You can donate on our website. Here's how you can connect with us and learn more. Thanks everyone for your time. I'll be in the hallway to answer questions.
Thank you very much. Very well within the time. There's even 3 minutes left. If there's someone with a very urgent question that you think might be relevant for everyone, we can take it now in those 3 minutes, and the rest we can take outside if you want to continue talking. Anyone with a burning question? I'm going to run to you with the microphone.
Hello. Congratulations on the progress on the FreedomBox project. What I wanted to ask is, do you value also the freedom of the software inside your operating system as much as you do for the free design hardware? Because as far as I understand, the hardware neutrality makes it that you also make available non-free firmware for Wi-Fi, for instance.
True. Yeah, good question. So we have a question here about, I think, two things. The first is, what's our stance on software freedom, and what's our stance on hardware that requires non-free firmware? The first is, we are a fully free software project. Now, I omitted it from this presentation because I only had 15 minutes, but our software is licensed under AGPL version 3, and we're free software from the top to as far bottom as we can. Now there's a further point made here about what if we have a device like the Raspberry Pi 2 which requires non-free firmware. Right now we support devices like this even though they have non-free firmware because we want to reach as many users as possible. The problem is this is the most widely known and accessible single board computer to most casual consumers, so that's why we support it. But down the line what we want to do is support only hardware that has fully free firmware. And that's why we're so excited about Olimex. That's a vision for the future, though. So today, we unfortunately have to make a small compromise. Okay? Any other questions? We have 1 minute left.
Is it okay? I'm going to shout. Oh, no, it's okay.
Okay, so I think one problem I have run into if you're running a server at home as a more advanced user is essentially that most of the consumer-grade internet service providers are, let's put it politely, not particularly friendly towards running any sort of transistor services. I won't even mention this kind where you put you behind 3 layers of NAT, but even flipping IP can problem. So have you actually put anything in with the FreedomBox software so far tries to address this kind of problems?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have a question about some of the problems that internet service providers give home users about running their own private servers. I have 30 seconds here, so let me just address this quickly. We have a number of settings and instructions that give you specific directions based on your use case. So if you're behind a NAT router, there's different instructions than if you're not behind a NAT router. Second, we also use our entire community resources to test these Freedom Boxes in different settings. On larger networks, on smaller home networks, and so we're always trying to think of innovative ways to solve these problems with our system. The short answer is yes, yes, we can do this, but the long answer is it's going to require some work to perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. So if you would want to continue talking, Danny will be outside, and big thanks, warm applause for Danny for the good talk. Thank you.
Thanks.